Christina Benjamin, and I'm back with another chapter video today. I'll be reading from the Geneva Project Truth, and we are on chapter 24. So enjoy! We were just a few yards from the opening to the fields when something stopped me in my tracks. Journey heard it too, because he stopped and motioned for us all to come toward him. "What's going on, Tippy?" Nova telepathed. "Not sure yet. I think there's something out there. I think it's a tar cat." "What?" "Just stay with Sparrow and Remy. Journey and I will track it." Nova gathered the others and huddled with their backs to a large mossy tree, while Journey and I fanned out, keeping in constant eye contact with each other. I kept hearing the heavy panting of a large animal nearby, as well as the frantic sounds of other small animals trying to scurry away. We swung wide off of the trail and were instantly upon it. There, with its back to us, was a large tar cat with its face buried deep in the earth, rooting around for something. It was slashing its massive paws with its long claws gleaming in the filtered moonlight. I was frozen with fear watching it thrash a marmouse it just pulled from a hole in the forest floor. The marmouse screamed in pain as the tar cat clamped its massive jaws around its helpless, writhing body. 65, let's go. It's not after us, and I think it'll be distracted long enough for us to get back to the Tryon Center. What? No, I'm not going to let it murder that helpless marmouse. We have to do something. Yeah, and that something is get the heck out of here before the tar cat catches our scent. These aren't like the tame tar cats we're used to at the center. Journey reached for me, but I balked and gave him a threatening look. I knew better than to cross him again, but he also knew better than to force me to defend myself. You can go, but I'm staying here. I turned my attention back to the tar cat and knew I had to act fast because the amount of blood pooling on the ground was spreading, flowing from the marmouse in massive amounts. I was frozen in place at first. In an eerie way, the pooling blood reminded me of when I spilled my inkwell. Knowing how quickly the ink ran out sprang me into action at once. Without a plan, I produced a large orb and hurled the flash of blue light at the tar cat, temporarily blinding it. My orb was enough of a shock to cause the tar cat to lose hold of the marmouse, but the poor thing was so injured it could do nothing but lay panting in a pool of its own blood. The tar cat whirled around and laid its hungry eyes on me. He licked his blood-stained muzzle, exposing his dagger-sharp teeth. He was seemingly contemplating whether he wanted to mess with me or go back to easy prey, because he kept looking back toward the marmouse. Either the prospect of taking down larger prey seemed too cumbersome to him, or the metallic smell of blood that was filling the air was too powerful to turn away from. But whatever the case, the tar cat began to turn back toward the maimed marmouse. "No!" I screamed. Strangely, this stopped the tar cat in his tracks. He looked back at me, curiously cocking his head to the side. Then the most shocking thing happened. The tar cat spoke to me. "So you'd prefer to be my dinner, then?" I was speechless. I frantically looked around to see who else this comment could have come from. There was nothing, no one. Journey already left me, and I was standing alone. I was unable to deny that the deep-throaty voice was none other than the tar cat's. He stood before me, twitching his tail impatiently, and took a threatening step toward me with a questioning look in his eyes. I knew better than to give up any ground. Tar cats feed on power, and giving up even an inch to him would only encourage him to attack me. I'd become accustomed to their temperaments since we were forced to encounter them daily as they roamed the grounds of the Tryon Center. And I knew my best bet would be to show him respect and convince him that I was more dangerous than he expected. I took a step toward him, begging my legs not to fail me, and gave a deep bow. This seemed to work. It stopped him in his tracks. We held this standoff for what was probably less than a minute, but it seemed like an eternity to me as I racked my brain for what to do next. I tried to steady my breathing and slow my heartbeat so I could concentrate and figure out what powers I had that could rescue me from the situation. I formulated the best plan I could on such short notice and decided now was a good time as any to give it a try. "I don't want to hurt you. I respect you and all creatures of the forest, and that is why you must leave. If you do not leave, I will be forced to defend myself and that marmouse, which may end badly for you." The tar cat lowered his head and glared at me, but I got the feeling he could understand me. He took a step back without ever taking his vicious eyes off mine. I slowly stepped to my right until I was close enough to touch the large tree near me. I placed my hand shoulder height on its massive trunk and fanned out my fingers as wide as they would go. My hand began to glow, and for the first time the tar cat wasn't looking at me as a meal. He was focusing on my hand and the slow gray matter that was spreading from the crackling waves beneath it. The hairs on his back bristled and stood as he crouched lower and growled. Now the hard gray stone began to spread rapidly. It climbed the tree, wrapping its way around the trunk higher and higher, choking the life out of it as it went. The ear-splitting sounds of the wood splintering as it gave way to the infection I was spreading echoed eerily through the forest. Soon what was once were bountiful branches were now heavy stone limbs that began to fall. One hit right between me and the glowering tar cat, who let out a startled hiss, and with that he made up his mind to retreat, and I made up my mind to do the same. I dove behind a large boulder that must have been remnants from the volcano. I balled myself up as small as I could behind it and waited out the storm of falling rocks that I created. I was beginning to feel pretty awful with myself for killing this tree. It was a majestic relic of the forest, and it was obvious I'd done too much damage to heal it. Maybe this is what worried Sparrow when Journey taught me this magic. I was starting to see how I could quickly lose control of it. I kept peering around the boulder to where the marmouse lay. I was terrified that one of the far-reaching branches would fall onto it, finishing the job the tar cat started. I couldn't take the chance of waiting for the tree to stop dropping stone limbs, so I took a deep breath and propelled myself toward the marmouse. I used the powers that Sparrow taught me to quickly bound through the air, which brought me to my target almost immediately. When it came upon the poor thing, I tried to pick it up as gently as I could, but it screamed in pain and thrashed wildly. I could see panic in the whites of its eyes. "I'm here to help you. I promise I don't want to hurt you. I know someone who can help me heal you. Just let me take you to her." Her eyes were still bulging and she was laboring immensely to breathe, but she didn't resist when I laced my fingers under her as delicately as I could. I took off running, holding her as gently as possible. I headed to where I'd last seen my friend, shouting Sparrow's name. "Over here!" Sparrow yelled to me. They were closer now than when I left them. They were coming to help me. Journey hadn't abandoned me. He'd gone for help. I was glad to hear Sparrow's voice, and I ran toward it. When I reached my friends, I could see the shock on all of their faces. I was panting and struggling to give them a rapid recount of what had happened, so that Sparrow and I could get down to business and heal the poor marmouse. "There was a tar cat. He's gone now because I scared him by turning a tree to stone. But he injured this marmouse," I said, gasping to catch my breath as I uncradled my arms, thrusting the marmouse toward Sparrow. "You have to help me heal her." Sparrow looked at me with more sadness in her eyes than I'd ever seen. "Tippy, I think she's gone." "No, she's not. She's still breathing," I croaked as my voice cracked, betraying my emotions. "We can heal her. Please help me," I said as tears started welling up, blurring my vision. "Okay, put her down and we'll see what we can do," Sparrow said kindly. I lay the quivering marmouse on my lap because even the mossy ground seemed too harsh for her ravaged body. Her fur was matted with blood and her sides were heaving as she struggled for each rattling breath. Sparrow and I laid our hands on her, and we watched as the warm yellow glow from our palms slowly spread over her. Some of her more superficial wounds began to close up, but the deep gaping ones seemed unable to find the means necessary to heal completely, leaving small ragged holes all over her body. I felt Remy's hand on my shoulder and looked up to see the sorrow that had washed over the faces of each of my friends. That was when I knew we couldn't save her, and I began to sob. I promised I'd help her," I cried. Everyone was silent, and I watched Sparrow move her hands away from the marmouse in defeat. Then I heard a soft, squeaky voice that could only belong to the dying soul in my lap. "I must beg another kindness from you. Promise me to take care of my baby. I was protecting him from the tar cat. Promise you will protect him." I nodded and softly pet her head, soothing her silky fur away from her glassy eyes. "I promise," I whispered. Then the marmouse gave her final shuddering exhale. I began shaking with uncontrollable sobs. It was so unfair that this poor animal had to die. It was so unfair that I had all these powers yet could do nothing to save her. It was so unfair that my life was so messed up and seemed like it was no longer my own. But what I found most unfair was that there was a baby marmouse out there who would have to grow up never knowing its mother. I knew what it felt like, and it ripped me to the core to know that I had let it happen to another. I was shuddering and taking in rapid, sputtering breaths between my sobs. Remy, who was kneeling beside me, wrapped his arms around my shoulder and hugged me tightly. We rocked back and forth while I let Nova gently remove the dead marmouse's limp body from my lap. Sparrow tried to clean me up, but I could have cared less what I looked like. I knew I had to find the baby marmouse and deliver the bad news about its mother. The trouble was, I didn't know how I'd be able to find the strength to do so. I felt like a pile of worthless mush, and would have been happy to just melt into the forest floor and disappear forever. You can't, Tippy. We need you. The baby marmouse needs you. You made a promise, and I'm going to help you keep it. I couldn't believe what Nova was saying. I knew he could hear my thoughts, but I didn't think he could hear what the marmouse was saying. It made me feel so much better that he understood her too. I felt renewed energy in the fact that he was on my side and would help me do this. He instantly lifted my spirits by eliminating the burden of fighting with him about why I had to rescue the baby. I looked past to the others to find him, but only caught a glimpse of his silhouette hunched over. At first it startled me, and I stood up thinking he was hurt or ill. But as I approached him, I saw something that melted my heart and raised a lump in my throat. Nova had dug a shallow grave for the marmouse under a tree and was working hard to carve a cross at its base. A new batch of hot tears streamed down my cheeks when he turned to look at me, and I saw the way his eyes were welling up. It reminded me of the way the rain pooled in the palms, creating a heavy sparkling droplet that swelled and stretched as far as it could before finally becoming too much and releasing into a free fall. I knelt beside Nova and began patting up the soft soil he had dug up. He joined me in smoothing the dirt on her grave, and when our sullied hand touched, I felt the familiar spellbinding spark that Nova gave me. We seemed frozen for only a moment, yet that moment told me so much. It was more than telepathy. It was more like seeing into the depths of each other's souls. It was shocking and comforting at the same time to see Nova's sorrow over losing the marmouse, and how it correlated too closely to his own feelings of loss over his family, just as it had with me. We were more alike than I knew, and that calmed me to have his understanding. He looked at me longingly for a moment, and I grew hot as he stared into my eyes. Then he retracted his hand and used the back of it to wipe at his forehead, leaving a big streak of dirt. I realized I was holding my breath until that moment and finally released it, reaching up to brush the dirt from his forehead. But I stopped halfway when I became aware that the others were gathered around us, and decided to just point it out to him so he could wipe it off himself. We all knelt and bowed our heads in silence, filling the air with our heavy sorrow. Although we hadn't been able to save her, we'd done right to send her off with our humble burial. My eyes were squeezed tightly closed when I heard Nova start to speak the most beautiful words I'd ever heard. Light to dark, bone to dust, our souls to you we trust. Take us you may to another day, not so far away. I do not fear, for the ones I hold dear are just around the bend, where there is no end. Our only love, light, and eternity. When he was done, I shuddered at the eerie beauty of his words and squeezed his hands with my thanks. He nodded at me and said, "Shall we?" I knew exactly what he meant, but the others seemed confused as they followed us back into the forest. Nova, what are we doing? We need to get back. You said so yourself, and that was before we stopped to fight a tarcat and bury a marmouse, Journey complained. Yes, Journey's right. If we don't leave now, we may all be caught, Sparrow demanded. There's something we need to do first, and I need all of your help for this, Nova said. I continued to lead us silently back to the spot where I encountered the tarcat. Soon we were upon the stone limbs that lay shattered as if made of glass. Limb after limb covered the forest floor in piles of gray rubble. It looked like a stone graveyard, and it made me shudder. I almost couldn't believe that I was the cause of such destruction. I didn't have time to really see how bad it was before, because I was so busy trying to rescue the marmouse and not get clobbered by the falling branches myself. But now, standing in the totality of my damage, I could only feel shame burning hot inside of me as I looked up to where the once majestic old tree stood. Nova put a comforting hand on my shoulder and drew the others around me. Sparrow was staring, mouth open in shock, while Remy's eyes seemed so large that they were threatening to pop right out of his head. But Journey stood sternly with his arms crossed, looking annoyed. So what do you need us to do? He asked patronizingly. We can't leave the forest like this. It's too suspicious. And we can't afford to draw more attention to us. We need to clean this up. Journey, you need to crush as much as you can. Sparrow, Remy, can you pile the smaller pieces up so they look just like ruins that we would bring back to the rubble pile? Everyone nodded silently and got to work. Nova and I wandered around for a bit until I located the spot where the tar cat had been. At first I was disoriented, since the surroundings all looked the same with the gigantic stone limbs everywhere. But once we stumbled upon it, there was no mistaking it. The ground was saturated with crimson blood. The smell was so strong that I could taste it, and it made my stomach pitch violently. I felt my knees buckle under the weight of my sorrow. Nova once again came to my rescue, steadying me and pulling me into a quiet embrace. I could feel my body rattling, and tried hard to fight the tears that were threatening to break through by burying my face in Nova's warm chest. "It's okay, Tippy," he said while stroking my hair. "Come on. We need to focus on finding the baby." This seemed to bring me back to my senses. I straightened up and rubbed my eyes to refocus them on our mission. I turned toward the hole that the tar cat had been thrashing about. It was big enough for me to crawl into at the mouth. I gave a look back at Nova before I knelt to wiggle my way into the hole. It was hot and smelled strange, like musky earth. I gave myself a moment to let my night vision kick in. I noticed that the tunnel started to narrow as I moved further in. The mouth must have been so large from the tar cat's attack, and I was beginning to get nervous that I wouldn't be able to go much further when I heard it squeaking to my right. I carefully turned my head and saw a set of tiny black eyes blinking at me. Its little nose twitched anxiously and inched towards me, curiously. Soon his whiskers were tickling my face as his wet nose nuzzled me. This filled me with such an overwhelming happiness and hope that I wanted to cry again, but this time because my heart was brimming with joy. The baby marmouse was alive and well. He seemed so happy and oblivious to what happened. He allowed me to scoop his warm little body up in my hands as I carefully backed my way out of the earth. When I finally reached Nova, he looked as happy as I felt when he saw me holding the baby marmouse, who kept rubbing his eyes to adjust them to the sudden brightness of the world outside his burrow. We couldn't help but smile when we looked at him. He was so small and delicate. He fit perfectly in the scooped palms of my hands. His black coat was so silky and shiny, and he had the cutest markings of toffee brown, fluffy fur on his face that looked like an animated mask as he sniffed and twitched quizzically at his surroundings. He had the same shaggy brown fur on his long, slender legs and round underbelly. His long, silky black tail wiggled excitedly, but I think my favorite feature had to be his oversized ears. They were so large that he couldn't keep the top half from flopping forward, and they were covered with a silver wispy fur that seemed as fine as if it were spun by a silk spider. It floated in even the most undetectable breeze and gave the appearance that it was alive, like tentacles collecting valuable information. At the sound of my voice, those ears would perk straight up in full salute for a moment before gravity would take over and they would fold over again, leaving his little silver wispies floating behind. I couldn't get the grin off my face as I stared at him. He was so full of life and confidence, so trusting and wondrous. The cruelty of the world hadn't spoiled him yet, and I made up my mind right then that I was going to do everything I could to keep him that way. By this time, the others had come over to see what Nova and I were doing. Sparrow squealed with delight when she saw the tiny marmouse in my hands. "Oh, it's so cute! Where did you find it?" Sparrow asked. I didn't know what to say. They didn't know I could communicate with animals yet, and I felt frightened to share that with the rest of them all of a sudden. Luckily, Nova sensed this and spoke up for me. "She found him over here by his burrow," he said, gesturing to the earthen lair. "He's so tiny," Remy said, coming in for a closer look. "What are we going to do with him?" asked Journey, craning his neck for a better view. "I think Tippy has decided that he needs us to care for him," Nova said, looking straight into my eyes. "Is that the best idea?" Journey asked. "Well, we can't very well leave him out here to fend for himself, can we?" chirped Sparrow, who seemed completely charmed by the marmouse. "He can't be more than a few days old." "We'll take him back to the center with us, and he'll need all of us to protect him," I said sternly. "I need to hear you all say, 'Promise that you'll protect him,'" I said, looking directly at Journey. They all nodded, even Journey, but I wanted more. I swore to his dying mother that I would protect him, and I had to keep this promise. I need to hear you swear to it, I demanded, holding my hands out with the tiny marmouse in them. Swear on him that you'll protect him. They all reached in a hand, one by one, and placed them upon mine, all touching the happy little marmouse as he inquisitively sniffed at them. And then in unison, they all said, I swear. Well, that was chapter 24. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tune in next week where we have a guest reading chapter 25 for you. And as always, you can go download your own ebook copy of Truth for free if you want to read ahead. Thanks. Happy reading.